I'm sure you had a decision to make today as you were drinking your coffee, looking at the forecast, hearing the birds. And so we will do our best job to make sure that you feel like you're outside, or at least get you inspired to get outside with some opportunities that we'll be talking about today. Again, my name is Courtney Lee. I'm our membership manager for ShoreRivers, and I welcome you back. Hello to all of you in the virtual land. Good to see you or know that you're there. So don't be shy. If you can't hear something or you have a question, I know Trina will buzz us in to allow you to contribute what you're thinking about. Before we start with our presentation today, I just wanted to highlight that many of you might not be receiving information about ShoreRivers, and I know some of you are, and because you tell me that you've heard of something that we're doing, so that means you're in our database, and I am the person that helps to manage the database, orchestrate the way we communicate our information to people. And so if you would like to start receiving our e-newsletters or eventually our biannual printed newsletter, please go ahead and sign up here on these sheets. It asks you a question of what watershed you are interested in, and that would designate which Riverkeepers emails you are sent.
I click all.
Yeah, so if you click all of them, you will get all of them. And they do email once a month, and they try to stagger them out at least once a week for the month.
Usually they're every week they're sequential. We kind of mix it up.
You will also get emails from the organization. Our executive director emails out, I think, once a quarter. And then sporadically, our event team will email out anybody who checked any of those watershed boxes, giving you some peeks, previews of some of the events that we will be holding.
If you didn't want it all, how would you know what your watershed is?
If you didn't know,
Miles River.
sure, yeah.
Probably just Miles River, huh? Okay, that sounds
Well, he covers Miles, Y, and Eastern Bay region. So a lot of people in this area will choose the Miles, Y, Eastern Bay checkbox and also the chop tank. Yeah, because there's a lot of,
So if you're like on the tread in Oxford, you're in the Chop Tank watershed. If you're going to St. Michael's and the north side of St. Michael's, you're in the Miles White Eastern Bay watershed. The south side of St. Michael's, Chop Tank. So it's really a lot of the issues overlap. So I recommend both.
And I will say that.
You can always not read them if you don't want to.
Well, that's true. And also remember that there is an unsubscribe button at the bottom of all our emails. It will take you off of our list completely. You don't have an ability right now to segment which types of communications you get. Our software doesn't easily do that for us. But I would suggest that if it becomes too cumbersome, you could at least maybe drop down to one watershed, one Riverkeeper email. That may help.
Are you using Constant Contact?
No, we use Blackbaud product called
I was going to say Constant Contact. If somebody unsubscribes, it's almost impossible to get them back in.
Well, that used to be true for us too, where I had to go through the software company and ask for them to be resubscribed. They've actually given us that to resubscribe somebody's
Value of working with a small.
Not actually.
But they, part of it is to maintain privacy and, intent. So they've just found a way that puts the liability on us essentially. Okay, without saying more than that, I just will pass this around. And there's Ben. You guys look like you had the ShoreRivers pen from last year. So that's great. And without further ado, we are here to talk about aquatic restoration efforts on two critical pieces of habitat under the water. We've got our oyster reefs and our underwater grass beds. And then as we start to think about the outside and recreating on these rivers, we'll talk about some river-friendly boating practices. And if you are not a boater yourself, hopefully these types of messages will ring true as you communicate with others in, certain social engagements that you become a part of. Because we really feel after these 3 sessions, you're going to be an ambassador of ShoreRivers. You're going to be able to spread the word that we are educating you about, and we really encourage you to do so. So without further ado, I'll let Ben introduce himself and give you his history and
Thanks, Courtney.
dispense your knowledge.
Well, I'll do my best. My name is Ben Ford. I'm the Miles by Riverkeeper with ShoreRivers. Been in this role for about 3 years. And before that, I worked at Washington College in Chestertown for about 12, running an experiential education program focused on the Chesapeake Bay. So in that role, I became kind of a Chesapeake generalist So I can answer a lot of cool questions about Chesapeake stuff. And now I am a water quality Eastern Bay, Miles River, Y River specialist. So I can answer any specific questions about the watershed and what Shore River is doing. That said, I'd like this to be relatively conversational. You don't have to hold questions till the end. If something occurs to you and you find very interesting, just call out or raise your hand or tag in on if you're coming in remotely. And without further ado, let's get to it. I'm not going to go over what ShoreRivers is, the river keepers, our area. Like I understand Annie did all that last week, right? You know,
Yes.
great. So I didn't want to probably seen this slide, but this is pertinent to what we're talking about today. So our vision statement is thriving rivers cherished by all Eastern Shore communities. And Annie talked a little bit about water quality in her presentation. So I am not going to do that. If you want to hear about the most recent water quality report, I would recommend attending one of our State of the Rivers in late April or early May. And you can pick which watershed you want to go, which venue sounds fun. There's beer and wine and oysters at all of them. They're all free, and they're super fun. And I'm going to be focused.
Bob can eat a lot of free oysters.
Hey,
Absolutely.
we don't want to, can't put it back. We can, but they don't do so often. Today we're going to be focusing on high habitat value, specifically SAV and oysters. So when we say thriving rivers, we mean for everyone. It's not just boaters. It's not just, waterfront property owners. It's commercial watermen. It's sailors. It's recreational boaters. And the way we get there is through some of these keystone species and important environmental kind of indicators like oysters and SAV. So when I say SAV, it's submerged aquatic vegetation. There's 7 to 10 species in the Chesapeake. In our watersheds, we're kind of focused on like 5 or 6 that are prevalent. We're also going to be talking about oyster reefs and why they're important three-dimensionally. This is from the TRED, so not from my watershed, unfortunately, but there's some great reef structure in the Miles Y and Eastern Bay. And we want these for the people, but we also want these habitats for what I like to call charismatic megafauna.
Yeah.
All the way down to, so this is a fever of cow-nosed rays. I had to look that up.
It's a fever.
A fever of rays.
That's how you describe it.
A group, yeah, like a murder of crows, a parliament of rooks. There's my boat looking at the rays.
Man, that's a great video.
Isn't it cool? What about this one though?
We had dolphins.
This is in Long Haul Creek, right next to the in the milestone.
Yeah.
From charismatic megafauna like rays and dolphin, all the way down to polychaete worms and tunicates like sea squirts. Everything plays a role. And a healthy oyster reef and a healthy SAV bed are how we get there. So we're talking today about, Annie talked a little bit about what near shore habitat or living resources mean in her presentation. I'm not going to be talking about buffers, wetlands, or shorelines. We're going to be talking about SAV and oysters. So, but these are kind of, when we talk about near shore habitat, we're going from that kind of near shore upland all the way down to oyster reefs, which can be in the 20 feet deep range. Now, the mid channel of some of our rivers can be 40 to 60 feet deep. Usually definitely no SAV down there, usually no oysters down there. But there could be other things. I'm not discounting that deep channel, but we're focused on that near shore today. Oh, there is sound. So SAV, this is an SAV bed from the Miles River. They're incredibly important. Oh, that's very distracting. Sorry. Like any vascular plant that requires sunlight, they fix carbon They're very good at sequestering carbon, and they take a lot of the excess nutrients out of the water. When we talk about pollution in our waterways, we're not talking about bottles generally or trash. We're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And SAD are amazing at removing all of those things, or at least sequestering or settling those things into the substrate. They're also nurseries for all kinds of fish. It's very important. We have metrics, the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, which I think they're hearing about next week.
Yes.
So I won't get super into it, but I am going to do a little teaser. There are metrics by which we are measuring our trends. And spoiler alert, we're not doing well on a lot of them, but some of them we are. Oysters are one of them. It's one of the few that we actually met the Chesapeake Bay Agreement goal. SAD, well, as we'll talk about, we did not. But in 2023 to 2024, overall abundance remains steady. 2025 to 2024 to 2025, there was about a 3% decrease. So it fluctuates, and we'll talk about why. There's a certain number of threats to SAV. Mute swans, which when I grew up in Oxford going to the Strand, they're all over the place, and I got bit by one. So they're my natural enemy. But they're also the natural enemy of our native SAV. These are an invasive species. They're non-native swan, though beautiful. They're ornery, and they, unlike our native waterfowl that flip SAV off at wherever they can reach, these guys reach down and grab it and pull it out by the roots. Just
Rude.
catastrophic.
Rude.
Super rude. It is rude.
Really rude.
But I think also because there's some high protein in those nodules
Yeah.
and roots.
There's a reason they do it, and it's perfectly fine that they do it wherever they came from.
Unless it's here.
Unless it's here. Don't do it in our watersheds. Other invasive species like, so this is water chestnut. We don't have to worry about this in the Mileswai and Eastern Bay because it's a little too salty, but up in the sassafras, water chestnut can be like really challenging. It goes everywhere. It can cover an area pretty quickly. And what it does is it means that no light will go through. And, underwater grasses need that light. I'm gonna sprinkle like some boating practice stuff throughout. But one thing is that if we see native grasses rebound, one of the threats is your propelling and boaters wanting to go into it. Now, this is our boat in it, but we are doing licensed work through the state for SAV restoration. Those prop tracks we did not make. We lifted the motor up and walked that boat in. It's not that we're not disturbing it. It's not perfect, but you could see that somebody went through there with their prop down and we kind of mowed that SAV. So
It's an education process though, right? Because people don't realize.
totally. And it can also wrap around your prop. It's a huge pain in the butt. You don't want that to happen. But it's harmful to the organism. So these tracks are from hydraulic clamming, which is a legal practice to harvest razor clams or soft shell clams in the Chesapeake. They use a underwater conveyor belt that blasts the bottom with high pressure water, flings everything up onto a conveyor belt. They pick the clams off, and all the razor clams that are being harvested are for the crab bait market. It's illegal to eat. Not illegal. You can go out and get razor clams and eat them. It's not illegal for you to eat them. It's illegal for them to be harvested for human consumption in Maryland. But they're all for the bait market. There is no fishery management plan for the state, but it is a legal harvest. So that's one of the challenges that we have. Like I said, it's a legal practice. It is quite destructive to SAV. This SAV bed, you can see that kind of green dappling, brown dappling. That's on the Y River. The landmass is Y Island in the upper corner. And this is inside of what's known as an SAV protection zone. So this instance of clamming was illegal. And we'll get to that. So,
Way to mark them.
there sure is. The state is required to mark them by law for them to be enforceable. Every 3 years, the SAV maps are updated. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but not in this depth. And each time that the boundary changes direction, there's supposed to be a buoy.
Yeah.
It costs the state between $1,000 and $4,000 per buoy to get in place. That's purchasing, weighting, chain, painting, hydrographic, going out, dropping it exactly where it's supposed to be, and then replacing them when they all get destroyed by ice every winter. Unfortunately, they're often not replaced, which means that the SAV zone is not enforceable, or it's very challenging to enforce. There are almost 500 SAV buoys in the Merriam portion of the bay. So at $1,000 to $4,000 per buoy, depending on where it is, you can do the math. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and they have to be precisely placed. So usually they're not, unfortunately.
Can't they be marked on that person's, the boater's navigation?
Yes. So that would be, there have been efforts to have commercial harvesters have GPS on their boat. Commercial watermen are very resistant to that. As you can imagine. I mean, I wouldn't want one on my boat, frankly, if I were even just out playing. I don't want Big Brother knowing that I'm at Cackley Island. But I'm also not
I'm
engaged in
thinking
harvest.
more like, I don't remember, God, my days of sailing are long past, but there used, you'd have the navigation tool of some sort, and it would tell you where other things were to avoid.
Oh, we have the technology. The technology is easy. It's the political will to make it a requirement. So here's a little trend. We don't even have to digest this, but basically this is 2024 over here, 1984 all the way on the left. So very Orwellian chart. Here we go. The 2017 target for SAV was 90,000 acres restored. We clearly didn't make that in 2017. Or we did hit it in 2017, but we are not there now. You can see the fluctuation. Here's our goal for 2025. Look at that. We've never hit it. And here's our total goal. Oh, too far. 185,000 acres. So right now we are less than halfway there. So what ShoreRivers does is we have a license with the Department of Natural Resources to go out and harvest certain SAV species for seed. We take these SAV and we put them in the second of its kind turbulator, which is like a violent reverse French press. And it extracts the seed from all that other vegetative material so that we can get a jar of refined seed, a jar that has like 5 million seeds in it, which is pretty cool. When we have that seed, we go out and plant it in places where we think SAV should be grown. How do we measure SAV? Oh, my animation term. Here we go. By airplane. There's a for the airplane.
Ben, you're killing me.
There's supposed to be there's a photo under there, but animations anyway. By drone and by kayak, by human eyes, and that is a way that you guys can get involved. And I'll get to that. That's the last slide in this series about how to become an SAV watcher for ShoreRivers. Yeah.
I think the answer to this is intuitively obvious, but how have drones changed the scope of your work?
Big time. Right now I've got my phone face down so it's not distracting. I'm sending photos that I took yesterday by drone of a major pollution infraction to MDE's Environmental Crimes Unit. So we use drones all the time. But the way the Chesapeake Bay program or the state of Maryland monitors SAV began a long time ago. When satellites existed, drones did not. But the satellite technology was basically like the satellite's up there and it's going,
beep, 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 beep.
You know, I just thought that would, but like they had cameras, but they couldn't see anything that was super relevant. Now we have satellites that can, you know, all but read your wristwatch. In the language, in the Code of Laws for Maryland, COMAR, it actually specified that the only way that they could measure SAV was by airplane flyover. So they couldn't use satellites, they couldn't use drones, they couldn't use, they've got satellites that can do different kind of imagery that might even be able to tell you what species it is. Who use any of that? So my first year at ShoreRivers, we actually changed that law so that the state, just freeing the state's hands, they could still use an airplane, and they are. And that's how they generate these maps of SAV in this, you can see parts of the Miles River there and parts of Broad Creek and Harris Creek, which is pretty cool. This is through the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. They manage the SAV monitoring program for the Chesapeake Bay program.
So what's the green, the highlighter too?
So the darker green means the denser SAV. Yellow means, or yellow or blue mean very undense.
Can you show me Broad Creek?
Broad Creek is right here. So that's all Broad Creek.
So what's the highlighter kind?
The
bright green.
Bright green, Kelly green.
Kelly green is dense.
Oh.
Is good.
So it's denser and closer in, of course.
Yeah, Broad Creek and Harris Creek are pretty good. Choptank's SAV, comes and goes, but it's pretty dense. It's where a lot of our harvest for restoration elsewhere is coming from.
So if you read Broad Creek all the way into that St. Michael's, do you read it up on the map on this projected there?
This is, can you see? So there's St. Michael's, right?
Uh-huh. And then
There's St. Michael's. There's like the old environmental concern property, and then, this is Broad Creek proper.
and then San Domingo. Okay, all right.
That's kind of cool. I don't know why I was holding my arm that way. But so I think this is from 2023. And the new SAV. So there's limitations to this. The flyover, the airplane flyover, which is how we're doing this now, they do once per year because it costs about $1 million.
Right.
They contract, and this is frustrating me, they contract with a company out of Ohio to do it. So it's not even like local money, even though we got pilots here. But they're doing really, really good work. They're using high-tech cameras, and and then the VIM stitches this together into a mosaic so that you can actually generate the maps. In the future, we will be able to have either a hybrid system where there's some airplane photos like this or satellite photos. The advantage of moving towards satellite imagery is that we will be able to do this multiple times per season. Right now, we're only doing this the peak of the growing season. But there are entire species of SAV, which are native here, that have grown, flowered, seeded, and senesced before they even do the flyover. So we actually know that, here, this is Tillman Point going up in Eastern Bay. It's Claiborne right here. This whole edge right here is covered in SAV, but it's a species, it's an early season species. So it's often gone by the time they do the flyover, and so it's not reflected on the maps, which means it's not reflected in public policy. And that's a challenge, and that's one of the things we're working on. When you have the maps, this is a different map, the same area, with blue polygons. I love maps, so hopefully I won't over-map you. These are called SAV protection zones, as we were talking, the ones that are required to be marked by buoy. And what this means is that you're not allowed to use particular gear type for harvesting things. You can still trot line for crabs in there, but you can't hydraulically clam, you can't dredge for oysters, and you're supposed to, if you're a recreational boater, avoid disturbing the SAV within these areas. I don't think you'd ever get a citation. There's nothing in COMAR that would give Natural Resource Police the authority to, if you anchor here and you drag your anchor, they're not going to give you a fine. You should just be aware that this is an area that's been deemed important because of its historic abundance. We have a challenge in that
these are incredibly difficult to enforce. So down here in Tillman, Black Walnut Cove here, if anyone's familiar, there was a recent case in Talbot County in front of the in front of the district court, and 3 clammers were in there quite far in there, which they're not allowed to be. DNR had them dead to rights with a drone, GPS tagged, and it wasn't even probation before judgment. It was just thrown out. For reasons I don't have enough time to really get into it, but I was in the courtroom and it was quite frustrating. We were working on how to make these areas more enforceable, and this is not I want to just caveat that I am not intending to be critical of commercial watermen, because these areas are the nursery for juvenile striped bass, for yellow and white perch, for crabs. If we want abundant natural resources that are harvested commercially, we also need abundant SAD beds. So it's very important. So here's the satellites. This is a little, yeah. So this is Dave Matthews singing Satellite, one of his songs. I already talked a little bit about, that's for you, Courtney. We're getting there. We're getting closer to being able to do this sort of work with new and emerging technologies. Not that satellites are super new, but they're getting better. There are some challenges, but as I outlined.
You can't put up your own buoys.
You cannot put up your own buoys. Why not? You need to put a buoy. It has to be approved by DNR, NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Coast Guard. So you need permits from all 4. And some of them have to be lit, and some of them, and it's just like, it's a nightmare. The state can do it because they have a permit in hand, and they have a relationship with these, or like these other entities that they can say, here's where we're putting these, especially navigation stuff. Navigation marks move pretty frequently, and certain communities are actually, if you've ever gone into like Greenwood Creek, for example, which is a tributary to Eastern Bay, kind of or Prospect Bay. Some of the navigational markers look official. They're red and green, cans and nuns that you can go into the channel, and but they're private markers, so the community actually places them with the support of DNR, so that they're actually reflected on charts and everything. It's really cool. I don't know how they do it. I've never had to do that, but so what can you do about SAV? As we talked about, this is a critical these are the kind of underwater meadows that we need if we want abundant resources. Right now, there are a lot of challenges. I outlined some of them. Policy-wise, you could become an advocacy volunteer with us. There's another newsletter, but it's only during Maryland legislative session. So we keep people on top of what bills we're following, what bills are leadership bills. It's a really fun newsletter. It comes out once a week. And sometimes there'll be a call to action. So like we'll give you a template or some bullet points, guidance on how to submit a letter, a written testimony to either a committee or to legislators to maybe move the needle on some of the stuff. You can also become an SAD watcher with us. So this is a cool program where you can kind of, you say where, I live here, and we're like, oh, there's some areas around you that we would love to have monitored. We'll send you, say, within this long time frame, go out at low tide and see if you can see what kind of species. There's training for this also. Yeah.
Maybe they could just take a picture.
Yeah. Pictures are tough because sometimes we want to know if there's seed, how close it is to being ready. And the training covers all this, and it's a fun training. It's a practical, hands-on training. but these are some ways you can get involved if you're interested in submerged aquatic vegetation. I'm going to move on to the next one, oysters. Any questions about SAV?
Yeah, come back.
Yeah.
So we've got 11 folks here today. How do we raise overall awareness? There are a lot of people in this county, or the surrounding counties. How do you measure the level of awareness about how important this is? Do we get involved in schools? Do we?
We sure do.
With media?
So, yeah. Do you want to take that or?
Well, I have one part of the
Oh.
answer. So you start, and then
Okay.
I'll add mine. When I talk about the marine awareness.
Okay. So we have an entire education department within ShoreRivers. We go into schools in Dorchester, Caroline, Talbot, Queen Anne's, but not a little bit in Kent. We're working our way north, and we're fulfilling a state requirement for a meaningful watershed experience, meaningful watershed education experience, or MWE. Right? And so we talk about sturgeon, we talk about oysters, and in the course of this, we talk about, other parts of this. We don't have a specific SAV curriculum because it's not required by the state. But increasingly, we're seeing young people, like, they're clued into this. They're like, oh, this is good. I can remember when I was a kid, I remember talking to people in Talbot County, where I grew up, about how much of a nuisance this was. And decades and decades ago, in, I want to say that it's in the 60s and 70s, Department of Natural Resources actually gave people like granular herbicide to get rid of it around their dock. So perceptions change, understanding of science changes, and this is all good. I think you've illustrated that this is a challenge because unlike oysters, which we'll talk about next, everybody cares about oysters. Oysters are like, everybody's like, they're pulling on people's heartstrings, which is crazy because they don't have a face. Like, why do people care so much about oysters? But SAV is challenging because it's like, people are like, you talking about seaweed? I'm like, kind of, but not really. It's not kelp. It's not like, can't eat it. And you can, it's gross. But, there's no harvest. There's no direct economic impact. It's fleeting. You don't see it in the wintertime. Unless you're out at low tide boating along the near shore, you don't even really see it. It might get wrapped around your prop and you're annoyed. It might get on the top of your trot line and you're annoyed. Like, it's a messaging challenge, I would say.
One of the Fort Coordinate says something too. The boss had me take a look at demographic shifts here in watershed area a couple of years ago. And we went to Annapolis. We went through some resources in Annapolis. And the fastest growing demographic in this area are people over the age of 60. At the time, this
This
is
is my surprise taste.
4 or 5
Nothing. I can't help it.
I'm hearing.
Oh, okay.
Better. Especially now. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, sorry.
Demographic thing.
So what we're seeing is, so Annapolis told us that by the end of this decade, that demographic cohort will be over 40%. People coming in from Washington, D.C., New York, Philadelphia, that's what I think. So,
That's what was.
Don't know much about the heritage of the Denmark Peninsula,
Yeah.
about the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I think people would be interested or they have a thirst for knowing where they moved to.
Mhm.
So I don't have an answer to this, but how do we satisfy that thirst?
I think there's an interesting pathway. I think that people, you could live in, Montgomery County, landlocked, whatever, go to your dentist's office and see Jay Fleming photography of, the commercial fisheries and wooden boats on, you can't eat at a restaurant in Maryland without seeing pictures of skipjacks and log canoes. And I feel like at some point you're like, well, what's this about? Or you're not. Maybe you're a completely incurious person and you just don't care. But I think a lot of people, especially if you purchase waterfront, we find this a lot, that the people that seek us out usually have moved here within the last 5 to 8 years. And they're like, wait, I'm seeing, like, my grandkids are coming and I want them to be able to swim off the dock. And somebody send me your bacteria report that's, a couple miles away. Is it safe to swim off the dock? And that's a point of engagement. So you could start from water quality. You could start from history and culture. Places like the Maritime Museum and St. Michael's do this really, really well. It's, as an aside, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when I meet people in St. Michael's and they're like, I discovered St. Michael's. I'm like, okay, calm down, Johnson. It's been here for a while, but I'm glad that you're here now. But
Front row for this show.
Yeah.
Well, and I have something to contribute too, because a while ago, 10, 15 years ago, there were many organizations that were partnering together to get a hold of that issue. And realizing that the realtors in the area would be the ticket, would be the gateway to dispense the information to the people buying into our local communities. And ShoreRivers has been a part of real estate collaborations and partnerships, training the realtors on the issues, and then giving them information that they can dispense to their homeowners that are purchasing for the first time in the watershed. And there were a couple of organizations that published a book for it was like green book for the Bay.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty thick compilation of resources, the do's and the do nots of how to live responsibly here in the region, and focused primarily on the critical area that Andy talked about last year. I think that publications of that were not renewed because rapidly things change regarding laws and resources that people could tap into. Some of them go away because most of our work collaboratively among environmental organizations is grant funded. And so programs and projects come on with grants, and then sometimes, if not managed properly, then they go away. So I feel like this compilation resource book became expired because things just went away. But there is still a need. I feel like that's a fantastic new project for somebody, is to kind of redesign the new, updated, beyond 2025 resource for people that live in the critical area. So that's one way. And yes, it has been done, but I don't see it moving forward in a continual fashion. There's been 2 books published in the past 40 years to target that, realtors. And then also with the marinas, marine friendly businesses, marine industries. That's something that ShoreRivers has been interested in tapping into to help communicate messages, particularly as it pertains to these voter practices. And so we were just awarded a grant last year with the Chesapeake Bay Trust to have an SAV awareness campaign. So we are targeting 4 marinas in our watersheds, 1 throughout each river, that is going to agree to have their staff trained in what underwater grasses are, why are they important, what voters should do to minimize their impact. We have money to produce a sign, an informational sign on SAVs that will specifically cite the species found in that river and what to do and what not to do, and then host a rat card. So that's one way that we're trying to make SAV, some people just think it's seaweed, it's gross and ew, So we want to try to make that message. These are underwater grasses, they're beautiful, look at the flowers, and know what they do. So you're going to want to be sensitive. So we're working on that a little bit.
Well, sometimes it's a question. Yeah. Like we have people come to us and say, well, we haven't seen the osprey. You saw osprey last year. I don't know if you saw the fledge, but and then what was going on with the osprey? So we started down a rabbit hole trying to find someone who could do a presentation, and it sold out so fast we had to move it from the Academy Art Museum over to the Avalon.
I heard, yeah.
So that was great. A lot of people were interested in that, but it comes from a question.
Yeah.
And somebody with the listening ear.
And I did the ShoreRivers Osprey Cruise last July 15th,
Right.
which happened to have been my birthday.
They're supposed to arrive in our region around my birthday, which is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day.
You did have.
And when they come early, I'm always a little bit annoyed. I'd love to see them, but I'm like, it's supposed to be my birthday present.
So just to give us the time check, it's 11:15,
Yeah.
11:10.
All right, I'm not gonna cruise through this but I'm going to talk about oysters.
Don't hurry through oysters.
I will not hurry through oysters. So, oysters, keystone species, they engineer a reef, which is a apartment complex for all kinds of other critters that we want. Usually, to our eye, these other critters are yucky looking, like polychaete worms and tunicates, the sea squirts, and mud crabs and whatever. They're not the charismatic species, but these are the things we love. So and plus we love oysters. They can also filter water. They denitrify the water they filter, they take sediment out and nutrients. They don't eat the nutrients, they're eating algae, but they pelletize that called pseudofeces, which is a fungi, and they put it on the bottom of underneath the shell, and then as the shell grows up, it's encapsulated underneath the reef. Forever. So they can remove nutrients and sediment and carbon from the water. All right. History of Chesapeake Bay oysters in 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes or less. Who's seen this map? This is cool. So this is the John Smith map. John Smith drew this after sailing around rowing the Chesapeake on a couple different voyages in a tiny little boat called a shallop with a bunch of other dudes with no shower. And they got it pretty right. If you were to tilt this, I don't know why they drew it this way, but whatever. If you tilt this is a pretty good representation of the Chesapeake Bay. This is John White. The manner of their fishing. This is a great engraving that was sent back as kind of a travelogue almost, or a advertisement to England to get people to want to come to the New World, being like, look how abundant it is. This is always really interesting for a couple, 100 reasons, but these guys are spear fishing. What do you need for spear to spear a fish in water? Later. We knew that you could. We knew that you could, at this time period, a normal way to fish would be with your eyes, through the water with a spear. I challenge you to be able to do that anywhere easily in the Chesapeake now. So this kind of is an illustration of what maybe the water quality was like before colonists got here. Thomas Harriot wrote, you do not have to read this because it's in the time before grammar or spelling, but basically talking about a sound where for many miles together in length, 2 to 3 miles in breadth, the ground is nothing else being but half a foot or a foot underwater for the most part of oyster shells, which is pretty cool to think about. We see oyster middens all over the place. So if you go down the beach, this is on Eastern Neck Island. So this is a ancient trash pile. So native people waded out, grabbed oysters, threw them on a fire, steamed them open, free, abundant protein that doesn't run away from you. And you can do it year round, but it was probably a good winter, spring food source because everything else was kind of sheltering or away. There are oyster middens on the Chester, and I know one in particular, that's not huge like some of the ones in Virginia, but it's sizable in a place where oysters cannot survive today. And what that tells us is that we have changed how fast freshwater enters the Chesapeake Bay system. Oysters used to be able to survive much further up some of these tributaries than they can today, because when the colonists came, it was forests and mostly, according to a lot of cool botany and archaeology. There's a name for it. Anyway, it was a lot of meadow that the native people kept open by burning. And so these were native warm season grasses and wildflowers to generate as much edge as possible, because edge equals abundance. Post-colonization, on the left, that's an archaeological dig from Jamestown, the fort of Jamestown. Those oyster shells were opened during the starving time. It kept the colonists alive in the first real colony in the Chesapeake. Those oyster shells are now in my home because they had trash cans full of them because they eat so many of them. On the right side, you see maybe some of the first watermen. Think about during the colonial or the plantation period where the enslaved labor, like, the landowner's not going out to hand tong or gather oysters or waterfowl or hunt. Enslaved people were the first watermen, the first hunters, the first, they were getting everything for the plantation. Later, technology came in from New England and made this much more efficient. Skipjacks, bug eyes, all these cool boats. Let's go. And then, especially around like World War II and prior, like when canning came in, you were able to export oysters further into the country, and an abundance of cheap labor through immigration, but also post-war, people looking for work. You have packing houses all over the place. There were like 17 packing houses in Kent Narrows. Now there's only one. On the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum grounds, a small boat shed is a remaining that is an extant. So this is from Baltimore. This is from St. Michael's. So this one down here, right here, that is right about where the crab claw is today. And that's a 2-story pile of oyster shells. Later, we inadvertently imported some oyster diseases that hit at various times, MSX and Dermo. You can see that oyster landings from 1931 to 2017 precipitously decline after MSX is detected and then later when Dermo is introduced and detected. And so we went from a high in this chart anyway, of like the 1950s of almost 7 million bushels. This is not oysters, bushels of oysters between Maryland and Virginia to in 2017, in Maryland, less than 500,000.
Wow.
Now, today, oyster landings are actually going up. This last year was catastrophic, though. They are is a really, really hard time for oystermen and commercial watermen in the Chesapeake, especially for the oyster fishery. But over the 10-year average, landings are around $20 million at dockside value. So that's good. Last year was like 500,000.
How about this winter? I'm sorry. I was just wondering about the winter we just experienced, good or bad?
For oysters or for commercial?
Oysters. I don't care about the commercial. I'm babysitting for 3 bushels of oysters.
Mixed bag. So because it was so cold, if you get a blowout tide and they're exposed, they'll die. They'll freeze. But if they're underwater, if they're below that mean low mark, I can't imagine it's going to hurt them.
Well, you also had the importation of oysters from other areas of the country, which impacted the oystermen. And they decided not to go out because they couldn't compete. They couldn't sell their oysters.
Well, and so that's part of the market. So I talked to people from Talbot County Watermen's Association. They said even before the ice, well before the storms and all the cold, the 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, he was like, I should have been out every day. I'd call my buyer and they would say, don't bother. The 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, he went out twice.
Yeah.
Because there just wasn't a market for him.
Right.
He's not sure why.
So that was that the reason why last year was such a bad year? People just
Yes.
didn't want oysters.
I guess.
Well, they
And
get
before
oysters.
the Potomac,
You go
before
to
ice.
look at the varieties of oysters on your menu when you go to a restaurant. A lot of them are from Newfoundland or Canada or upstate. They're not from around here.
But I don't see why that's bad. It's bad for the business, but it means our oysters are staying in our water. Isn't that good?
It depends on what
If you're a waterman trying to make a living, it's not.
I get that. But if you are just wanting the health of Chesapeake, if they sit for, I don't know, it seems to me like that might be a good thing.
in general, as it stands, and this is just my opinion, I think there other people might not agree, but I think the wild fishery as it stands right now is pretty well managed. Now, that's with 17 caveats. There's constant effort to open oyster sanctuaries, which I'm going to get into in a minute. And my question is how do more oysters on the market help this? Seems like it would be counterintuitive, but I also am not a commercial fisherman. Nor would I want to be, because it seems really hard.
And you also have the cultivated oyster.
Yeah.
Mark.
So, and that's the thing. It's like, you talking to some of these guys, they say, if we can get the oyster out of its shell, we can sell as many, like, to restaurants, to, whatever. It's the market for a wild live oyster that you would like shuck in a restaurant or shuck at home is just not there. And I think the pressure from restaurants is like, people want a immaculately clean outer shell and a deep cup and a flavor profile, that whatever. And so, yeah, maybe there's market pressure, but the market this last year versus the market in the year previous it seems like too dramatic a shift to illustrate a trend, but maybe we're seeing that. I don't know what, and I don't think anybody really does, but we will know in the.
So how do the diploids versus the triploids, how does that impact the ecosystem?
That's a great question. So let me go a couple slides, and I'm going to talk about dips and trips. So Professor Stan Allen at Vince. So he was. This is an interesting process. They were trying to figure out a way to test introduction of non-native oysters to save the oysters in the Chesapeake Bay quite a long time ago. I mean, not within my lifetime. And to test it, they wanted to sterilize non-native oysters. And they did that by making them triploid, which is basically a seedless watermelon or seedless grapes or triploids. So that just means they've got 3 chromosomes rather than 2. They can't reproduce. And they did that by chemically forcing a tetraploid, a 4 chromosome one, with a diploid, and that would make a triploid. So they made these triploid oysters, and as a control, they also did it with our native Chrysospora virginica oysters, and they realized that the triploids grew really quickly. Because they were not reproducing, they didn't put any energy into
One year, they're ready for market.
Well, and they were much more resistant to the diseases. They could get to market size before succumbing to these catastrophic diseases. And so they're like, wow, this is and really it was a game changer for aquaculture, because it meant that you could farm oysters, bring them to market quickly without them dying. For restoration purposes, they're not particularly useful because they don't reproduce. They live a normal lifespan, and
They build up reefs about it.
they could, but they're not gonna, they'll never reproduce. So ideally you have both, right? They each have a utility. I can't tell the difference eating one. Most aquaculture oysters are triploid, and wild caught oysters should all be diploid. Some, like Choptank Oyster Company or Marinetics in the Choptank primarily does diploids, because Kevin McLaren, he's like, I don't need to do triplets. These grow super fast. The water quality is great. Whatever. So some people do, some people don't, but most, like if you get New England oysters or farm Gulf Coast oysters or farm West Coast oysters, which are a totally different species, triplet, pretty much guaranteed. In 2010, we took the percentage of good oyster bottom from 9%. Sorry, this is a terrible math, but this is from DNR. So what do you expect? I love that. From 9% to 20, they say 24 on DNRs. It's really 25. They say 25. It's really about 24, a little over 24% of oyster bottom, including 50% of the best bottom for restoration. This was incredibly contentious. If anybody was living here at the time, there was a physical blockade of the Little Choptank River by commercial watermen, right here. So they were literally coming in with barges and workboats and being like, "You are not coming in here for this oyster restoration. Get off the bottom." And it's still contentious today. I was at an Oyster Advisory Commission last night until 8:45. And this is what we were talking about. And it got heated. They'll be recorded, and I can send you guys the link. You can see me get feisty. But one of the cool things that came out of this challenge between restoration and commerce is the Eastern Bay Oyster Project. So out of the OAC in 2017, one of the things that did reach a consensus was to put $1 million for 25 years into oyster restoration in the Miles, the Wye, and Eastern Bay tributaries, and $1 million to replenish the wild fishery. So $2 million a year for $25 million. That's a lot. That's awesome. We'll see if the funding stays. But that's been going on now for 4 years, and that has almost entirely avoided the controversy of the restoration of the big 5 oyster sanctuaries, which are the Tread, Little Choptank, Harris Creek, Anokin, and St. Mary's, Lower St. Mary's. So, and now they've got some new ones like Herring Bay and other places are getting them. Oh, I just said that. So these are the sanctuaries in the Miles, Wye, and Eastern Bay. There's 7 sanctuaries. It looks like there's 5, but Prospect Bay is cut into 3. So roughly half of the Miles River, roughly half of the Wye River, the entirety of Cox Creek, a big old bar off Tillman Point and Prospect Bay. Everything in yellow is slated to be planted by the state. Again, this DNR map, terrible. So you can't see what they've already planted because it's too small. But it's a cool map, and this is ongoing. There are also some cool community-supported restoration efforts. So there's a group called the Wye River Oyster Program, and they are raising money amongst people that live in the Wye River watershed to plant oysters under contract with using the state license in the Wye, in addition to these planters. So that's really cool. They're going to plant 2 barges, I think, this year at least, of spat on shelf in the Wye River. So
The question between rivers and I live on a creek.
Yeah.
It's not a river. Is the Wye River, is it salty or is it really clear? What is the Wye River? Water content. What is that?
like, what's the quality?
Well, I'm saying, does the oyster live in?
Oh, salinity range.
That's
Okay.
Salinity range.
So oysters can live in water that is slightly more than 5 parts per thousand. And just to frame this, 0 parts per thousand of salt is freshwater tackle. And 35 is ocean water. So somewhere between 0 and 35, generally, unless you're like in the Dead Sea, is like,
Okay.
So this is roughly 10 to
So what is
16.
this? I don't even know what this is. Give me one piece of information so I can figure out what I'm looking at.
What sort of information are you looking for?
Like, what's the land?
Where are we?
Where's St. Michael's?
St. Michael's is right here. St. Michael's right here.
That's all I'm saying.
Kent Narrows right there.
Okay, all right, that's it.
There we go. So this is Eastern Bay. This is the Wye River. And that's the Miles.
Thank you.
St. Michael's right there.
Harris Creek.
And then
Harris Creek's right here.
Right, and Rosin, all right.
And
That's
Broad
what I
Creek's
said, yeah.
Okay. So this is an ongoing effort, but we're going to have to kind of hopefully defend this funding successfully for the next 20 years, which mixed bag.
Job security benefit.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a program called the Marylanders Grow Oysters Program. We will supply you with cages and oysters found on shell to grow off your dock. Then these will be planted on one of the sanctuaries. These are critters that are just not even coming from like a true oyster reef, just coming from what's growing in these cages. I found oyster toadfish the size of like the sole of my shoe. These are polychaete worms, skillet fish, blennies, grass shrimp, tunicates, all kinds of, like I said, they're not super charismatic. They're all slimy and
But
wormy.
you slip back, so when I take out my bushels, my baskets.
Oh, I always put it back.
And these guys come out, get those guys back in the water?
Yeah.
Don't let the dog eat them.
It probably won't hurt your dog. What kind of dog is it? Lab?
Laugh, who didn't?
Yeah, I was gonna say labs can be a handful of broken glass. They'll be right. So threats to oysters. So I do want to just point out that when we talk about this is interesting because we often say harvest is the problem. Harvest of oysters is the problem. If you look at the harvest, the landings from 1931 to 1958, they're pretty static, right? Disease comes in, they drop again, they drop, and then they're static again for like 12 years. And then another disease came in. So disease pressure, big problem. Maintaining the expectation of a high oyster harvest while there are other pressures, big problem. So we did not adjust. We could have moved to aquaculture. We chose not to. It was not legal in Maryland until the 2010s. So unless you had a special carve out.
So how do those diseases get in water?
We moved oysters from the Gulf Coast and other places into here and brought disease with them. Algal blooms, pollution. If the dissolved oxygen within the water drops to below 3 milligrams per liter, it becomes anoxic or hypoxic. Anoxic is like less than 1. So bristleworms, the things that live in oyster reef, they don't care. They can live in space, I'm pretty sure. But like oysters need a certain amount of dissolved oxygen, just like we need oxygen in our air. You can see striped bass are not going to be down there if it gets low. When algae blooms, you actually get a spike of DO, and then it dies because it's a plant putting oxygen into the water, and then it dies, and that decomposition sucks all the oxygen out. So the bottom often gets really, really low dissolved oxygen. So there's a hidden gas in here. Look at that crab going. There he goes. So we like oyster reefs for their biodiversity. How do we measure oysters? So the Department of Natural Resources does a really amazing winter dredge survey. I got a preview of it last night. It's not official out yet, but the spat set in most places this last year was the highest seen in 41 years. So this is going to be an awesome year for oysters.
Do they know what a spat is?
Spat is a tiny baby oyster. So they start out larval and they have a foot and they swim through the water like this. And then when they find something hard, concrete, dock piling, ideally another oyster shell, which is really what they love. See them grow in glass bottles, all kinds of stuff. They don't like that as much. They fasten themselves down and they never move again. But they want to grow up. We want 3-dimensional reefs. We often hear a lot about like, oh, you need to like go in and cultivate dredge or something to knock the sediment off an oyster bar. But that wouldn't be a problem if they grew 3-dimensional, because then sediment's not going to get on the reef. And that creates all this what's called interstitial space. So we need it to be like a sponge so that everything can live in the reef. The oysters are all laying down flat on the ground. It's just not ideal for any of the reasons that we want oysters there for restoration purposes. We have what's called a Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, or SERC, oyster rig, which is a camera rig we drop down, which is how I got all that sweet oyster footage. DNR also does a sanctuary report, and then they also monitor the landings or economic value of the public fishery, so the commercial fishery. So this is kind of how we measure how oysters are doing. But I also want to, I'm going to just upset this just for 1 second, because I thought of this morning after I made this presentation. And this is my favorite way to measure oysters. What in the Thank you.
The floor bacon? How many can you eat?
Oh, I hate swimming.
That's how you.
Not unlimited.
Where's mine?
Here it is. Check this out. One way we can measure this is a really interesting way to do it. So oyster toadfish live on oyster reefs. The density and of oyster toadfish can indicate the relative health and biomass of an oyster reef. How do you though measure how many oyster toadfish there are?
When I catch them, when I don't want to.
That's true. It happens all the time. I catch them all the time too, and usually in the oyster cages. But what they figured out, they could drop a microphone down and they can. That's oyster toadfish hoots, and they can quantify how healthy an oyster reef is by the density of oyster toadfish calls underwater.
So they make this
So
noise.
cool.
This is their noise.
This is an oyster toadfish.
More than one.
More than one.
Is this like the normal amount, or is this?
That's a great question. I actually don't know if that is good or bad. I think it's good.
Well,
But you can hear them.
Do
You
you
can hear them, they're just back.
There's an oyster toadfish. There they
Oh,
are.
look at that.
One of the 6 fish that actually have been in space, which is a fun little factoid. And they were selected because they could actually put a little helmet on them because their heads are shaped funny.
Well, could you hear that choked fish if you're on your dock?
I don't think so.
Okay, never mind.
No, it's a special like acoustic microphone.
Okay.
We can't do it. We don't have the technology, but Smithsonian and University of Maryland Environmental Center can do it. OCs,
Okay.
yeah, can do it. So what can you do for oysters? Again, advocacy volunteer. There's a bill moving through that's actually being heard today in the Senate to open up 4 oyster sanctuaries to rotational harvest. That would drop from 24% of protected oyster bottom down to 15%. The scientific recommendation is 30. So we've never gotten there. Hence the protecting 30 by 30, like 30% of the forest by 2030. Like 30% of a protected habitat is sort of the scientific standard for how much you should keep in conservation when a otherwise healthy and robust population of X species. It really doesn't matter as much. So that's and unfortunately, I think that bill might have legs this year. It's really, when oysters are doing really well, when we're seeing reports of them like oyster abundance going up 500%, it becomes a little bit less of a political football to say, oh, well, we can open up some of these sanctuaries. Our position is that if you open a sanctuary to rotational harvest, it just becomes a public fishery. It is not a sanctuary if you open it up to human intervention. And we believe the scientific reports that we have read that you need to protect a certain percentage. So the commercial bottom is 76% of the bay bottom and 50% of the best bars. So there's already more than half in the public fishery. And I think if we, and that's my soapbox. But if you want to become involved with some of our advocacy efforts, there are ways to do that. You can also join the NGO program, Marylanders Grow Oysters. It's free. You can get oyster cages and we'll hang them off your dock and put them on a sanctuary. Or if you don't have a dock and you have friends who do, or there's interestingly, like the community Oyster Cove, and there's like the big gray condos in Kent Narrows as you're going like towards the Eastern Shore across the Narrows Bridge. They have a community dock. And the oysters that are grown there in a cage are shockingly amazing looking. They grow so fast because the flushing, the current. Now I wouldn't eat them, I don't think, from there, from Kent Narrows, but you put them on a sanctuary.
Why
Love
don't you eat them?
Because we monitor bacteria.
They've had some water issues, water clarity issues,
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah.
But don't forget to recycle your shells from when you eat.
Oh, yeah.
stuffed
That's
oysters.
another thing you can do. So if you're at a restaurant and you're getting oysters, ask them if they're part of the shell recycling program. If they say no, we're not, we never heard of it.
Drop them off at Fort Street,
Yeah.
the marina.
So there are a
down
couple
there.
of places that you can
Please drop off.
drop shell off, and they will be seasoned, which means they left in a pile for a year or two, so that all the funky bits are off of it. And then they will put them in a setting tank with those little, like eye larva, little guys swimming around. They'll fix to the shell. Shell gets put on a barge, planted on a sanctuary. It's pretty cool. So shell is the limiting factor for oyster restoration. We need more substrate, and shell is the best substrate. There are other substrate, but like concrete or whatever. People have tried hockey sticks. And there's all kinds of crazy stuff.
If you use a bigger shell, will you get a bigger oyster?
No.
No, they grow about an inch a year. If they're diploids, give or take, water quality, temperature, all that stuff. But I mean, they can live to be like 25 years, and if they grow an inch a year, they can live 25 inches. I've never seen one. If you want to sign up for newsletter, any of our advocacy stuff, you can scan this QR code. The QR code continues on this page. It's smaller, and there's a picture of me planting oysters. And I don't think I fell overboard this time. So yeah.
You were talking about the triploid.
Yes,
earlier. And I understand you said that, the native triploids are mostly in, the commercial, well, I was under the impression when they were first talking about introducing another species into the Chesapeake.
Asian oyster, yeah.
And yes, and they were gonna make them all triploid. And I remember I was at one of these places that did this, and I asked the scientist there, how good is your process to make them
100%.
triploid? He said, about 95%. So then that means we're 5% of what we're
Yeah.
doing is introducing non-native species. Are they using those now?
No, in fact, you're not allowed to put non-native oysters in any, so one of that was a test.
Yeah.
To see, so the discovery that you can make a triploid native oyster and it would grow rapidly and be disease resistant was a byproduct of them seeking to see if they could introduce. And then they realized they didn't have to, because our native ones could do the same thing if subjected to the same, process. And when they first started doing this, it was like a bunch of really gnarly chemicals to get this like tetraploid. Now they've figured out a way that's like less invasive and like, triploid. But now to get, now they just have a stock of tetraploids. So to get a triploid, they just put tetraploids and diploids in the same,
Tank.
and they do their thing.
What's the story with Harris Creek? I know that was, I only know a little bit. It was an experimental something or other, but they weren't allowed to harvest them, but they were feeding them.
Yeah, so it's
Was that successful?
big time. Yeah. So when this oyster report goes live, you'll see that when they did their dredge survey, they got in some parts of Harris Creek, they got over 1,000 spat per bushel, which like unheard of.
Okay, so it was, because I've heard negative things about it, that it
I
just,
could guess from who.
okay, so why did I hear it, and what was their take?
There has been since 2010, when these were kind of carved out, an effort to overturn that effort, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Harris Creek's one of the big five. Harris Creek, Trad, Minokan, St. Mary's, and the Little Chop Tank have got millions and millions of dollars of state and federal money. Because of state and federal, they will not come out of sanctuary. They will be sanctuary forever unless something really dramatic happens politically. More dramatic than we're seeing now. Let's just put it that way.
hard to believe.
Hard to believe. It would be hard to believe that they would come out of sanctuary because there's been so much investment, public investment, and then to have out and if people could just go in and just grab whatever they wanted if they had a license, that would sit poorly with most people, I think. You will often hear that sanctuaries are where oysters go to die.
That's what Chris was saying.
Yep. There are 46 or 48 oyster sanctuaries in the Maryland portion of Chesapeake Bay. Only about half of them have received any sort of public investment that I would say would be significant. There are sanctuaries. There's a sanctuary off Smith Island in Maine. It's called the Lower Main Stem Oyster Sanctuary. That's 26,000 acres. It's huge. It's a big polygon. It's a big rectangle. It was made sanctuary in 2010. No one's allowed to oyster there, and has had $0 of state money invested in restoring it. From that perspective, I completely understand the frustration of anyone hearing that. That said, every sanctuary is different. Some are incredibly successful. Some have not been invested in.
That's the component I'm missing, because the sanctuary to me sounds like it's all good, 100% good. No, a sanctuary needs tending. And is that what
It needs investment. And
what does that mean,
you
investment?
need to put oysters there.
Oh, and so if you carved it out but haven't reinvested with new oyster, is the place they go to die. So you need to keep investing.
I would never characterize any sanctuary as a place that oysters go to die necessarily. It's there are sanctuaries that have a salinity regime that is not conducive to a high spat set. So they need to be a higher salinity regime to reproduce that they can live. So like the lower Chester River sanctuary. So basically from Love Point to Eastern Neck Island up to Rock Hall, there's like a big area, bunch of historic bars, some of the most productive oyster bottom in history, where like a lot of the battles, the oyster wars were fought. There are still oysters there, growing happily. We've dredged them up in a skipjack that are like 6 inches long. I've never seen a spat set on the shell because it's too fresh. This last year, they did get a spat set. Not a big one, but it's the first in like 10 years, which is pretty cool. So it's possible. But the state has not invested a single dollar into these sanctuaries.
Okay, well,
since
that's
they were.
answering the question then.
So you need substrate, you need shell for the spat to set on, and you need to put brood stock. And if there's like, you think like, there are not enough oysters on the bottom to generate enough spat that you get a significant spat set, even if the conditions are right. So there's all kinds of.
I understand. So that's your point. Your point is just because you have a sanctuary, if it's not tended to, the sanctuary isn't ready to thrive. For it to thrive, you need the investment and the knowledge. Okay, I got it.
But you'll hear Harris Creek sanctuaries where oysters go to die.
That's what I heard.
I would say, I would laugh at that person's face if I were me.
Because you know that there's.
Because I know that they're,
I was really just alarmed.
I wouldn't laugh in their face. Don't do that.
No, I'm not going to because I thought.
You should carry around a TNR dredge report. It's like 185 pages, and just in case.
Look at this. We're gonna have
Take
one
this.
song. Thank you.
Okay. Newton's third law,
Yeah,
a force results in an equal and opposite force.
yeah,
That could be applied to aviation propulsion.
Yeah.
Economics, ecosystems. So we've seen examples in national forests where there's human intervention
Mhm.
and we have unintended consequences.
So yeah, that's the disease.
So the question I have is, what kind of thought is going into some of the human intervention we're doing right now? You know, what are we thinking 20, 30, 50 years into the future? We think we're doing the right thing, but is there somebody in there contrarian saying, well, maybe we're not?
I think
Christian church.
this is the largest oyster restoration in the world. So it's also the first. Every other place in the entire world that has an oyster culture, when they have depleted their native stocks, have gone to a non-native oyster. When you go to France and you get a Benon or a whatever, the expensive clear raised whatever, that's an Asian oyster. You could get a European oyster. They still exist, but the fishery was just ravaged.
Were they ever as abundant as ours? I mean,
Yeah.
is that right?
The Romans brought oysters from England by boat to Rome to eat. I bet they were pretty gross by then.
But
But
they
they,
were Jewish.
I don't know how they shipped them, but they did. They managed to do it. The Romans loved oysters, so there were oyster Gulf in the Mediterranean. People were eating oysters. I mean, I lived there for a little while. And like, I don't think anybody raised oysters in the Med that I ever heard of. So like, it's cheap, abundant protein that doesn't run away. It's really easy to go out and just take it all. So that's one of the reasons behind the sanctuary effort. And I think we're seeing it pay off now that you're seeing the biomass, the increasing biomass within some of these restored sanctuaries starting to like go outside of the sanctuary and replenish some of the oyster stocks that are outside of those areas. And those are in the public fishery. That's great.
That's good.
So in a nutshell, that is why you would want to have native oysters in your region versus all farmed.
Farmed oysters are also native. They're usually the triploid ones. They're the seedless water ones. So they're not,
Right.
Replenishable.
But there's a commerce, there's a commerce there,
Totally.
and people don't know the difference, you didn't know the difference. So you just need an informed, politic.
There are lessons learned from other ecosystems, for example, abalone were wildly overharvested, Monterey and the Channel Islands, and that sort of thing. They're trying to come back. Are you sharing how-tos?
that's a great question. I would imagine there's some information sharing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I know that in the bay, there's a restoration. It's not in any of our watersheds, but further towards the mouth, there's an effort to restore bay scallops.
Cool.
And because they were almost extirpated. And they're starting to try to restore them. And I think they used a lot of these kind of efforts to kind of regulate, manage, and restore like the fishery, like the abalone fishery, for example. I think they're like, okay, well, like there's a playbook almost on how to do this. But they've also both Virginia and Maryland have learned a lot from this oyster work. Two different organisms, but similar policy. So I think that's probably been a boom.
Speaking of that one, we had an audit in Broad Creek, right by my dock. We were kayaking, and here was this. I thought it was a muskrat, but it wasn't a muskrat.
That's what my wife and I call a marsh unicorn.
Okay, we had a marsh unicorn.
Yeah. If you can see, river otters are amazing.
But it was hallucinating.
So for the people here, you might be interested to know that the Skipjack Association is doing 2 field trips this coming semester to go out and plant spats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do it.